Hey everybody, Lori Spencer here. Hope you're having a safe and happy holiday. It's been a while since I uploaded any new content to my channel. Needless to say, things have obviously been very busy at my real job in the newsroom during the weeks leading up to and following the 2024 election, and I just haven't had time to produce any new episodes of Strange Bedfellows or Hidden History Revealed. Hopefully, you've been catching up on previous episodes during my brief hiatus, and I also hope that you enjoyed my 12-part true crime series, Who Killed Bobby Kennedy, that I devoted a big chunk of 2024 to writing, researching, and producing. If you haven't checked those out yet, you can find them under the Podcasts tab of my channel. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and on Rumble too for the uncensored videos that YouTube won't let me show you at rumble.com/Lori Spencer. As 2024 draws to a close and I'm getting a little more free time over the holidays to catch up on my reading, I thought it might be cool to share the books I really enjoy with you. Over the Thanksgiving weekend, the thought occurred to me, hey, why not start a book club? As you guys know, in addition to being a journalist and a radio news anchor and a voiceover artist, I'm also a historian. So this book club idea combines three of my greatest passions: reading great books, narration, and talking about history. If you follow my other YouTube channel at Kennedy Americans, you know that I'm a Kennedy buff, and I've chronicled this fascinating American political dynasty's rise from the patriarch Joseph P. Kennedy to the presidency of John F. Kennedy to the assassinations of JFK and RFK, right up to now and the presidential campaign in 2024 of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with the Kennedy Americans podcast, which you can listen to on my Rumble channel at rumble.com/Kennedy Americans. Now that Donald Trump has appointed RFK Jr. to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services in his upcoming administration, the American people's interest in the Kennedys is rekindled, and a new generation of Americans are curious to learn more about RFK Jr., the Kennedy family's lasting imprint on our American life, culture, and politics. So this seems like the perfect time to pull some of my favorite books about the Kennedys down from the bookshelf, blow the dust off, and share them with you, along with my own commentary and knowledge gathered over 40 years doing research on the Kennedy family. Since the death of RFK's widow Ethel Kennedy on October 10th, 2024, I've been rereading an excellent book that I hadn't revisited in years, and it's just too good not to share. The book is After Camelot, A Personal History of the Kennedy Family from 1968 to the Present by J. Randy Taraborelli. Kirkus Reviews called it a big, juicy read for Kennedy fans, and that it is, my friends. I've decided to make this the first reading in my new history book club because this seems like a perfect place to pick up the story where I left off after finishing my 12-part podcast series about the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy in 1968. I'll take you through the turbulent, troubled years that followed, all the way up to the here and now. While there are literally thousands of books about the Kennedys to choose from, as a Kennedy historian, I absolutely love this one because it's just got so many rare tidbits and stories that even the most dedicated of researchers have never heard before. No matter how much you think you know about the Kennedys, I can promise you that you'll find much in this book that is new to you. It's far from a rehash of stuff we already know, and most importantly, all of the stories in this book, unlike so many of the others, are actually true. The research Taraborelli put into this book is really impressive. It's a massive 600 pages, and of that, nearly 100 pages are just notes on his sources. Everything here is well documented, from personal interviews Taraborelli did with hundreds of credible, first-hand living sources to documents from the JFK Library, including many that are newly declassified, and the National Archives. as well as newspaper and magazine articles from the period. This book, After Camelot, published in 2012 by Grand Central Publishing, was a New York Times bestseller and later turned into the TV miniseries The Kennedys After Camelot. J. Randy Taraborelli also wrote the New York Times bestseller Jackie, Ethel, and Joan, The Women of Camelot. Perhaps you've read that one or seen the made-for-TV movie that was based on his book, and he is quite the Kennedy scholar. He's written 4 books now on the Kennedys. His latest, Jackie, Public, Private, Secret, was released in 2023, and he is currently writing the screenplay for a new film treatment of that book. He's also written biographies of Marilyn Monroe, Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor, Princess Grace, Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, Cher, Madonna, Beyonce, Carol Burnett, the Hilton families, and the Bush families. For more than half a century, Americans have been captivated by the Kennedys, their joy and heartbreak, tragedy and triumph, the dark side, and the remarkable achievements. This book gives you a behind-the-scenes look at the years after Camelot. It describes the challenges Bobby and Ethel's 11 children faced as they grew into adulthood, and the deaths of the 2 sons, David and Michael, who died tragically. It explores Eunice Kennedy and Sergeant Shriver's remarkable body of philanthropic work, the emotional turmoil Jackie faced after JFK's murder, and the complexities of her eventual marriage to and bitter divorce from Aristotle Onassis, the sudden heartbreaking death of JFK Jr. in a plane crash, as well as the stoicism and grace of his sister Caroline, now the only living child of JFK. He also brings into clear focus the intriguing and at times infuriating story of the late Senator Edward Kennedy's long life and death from cancer in 2009, along with some shocking details about Chappaquiddick you've probably never heard before. After Camelot is not a hit piece on the Kennedys, nor is it a worshipful account written by a Kennedy family authorized acolyte. It's an honest, unflinching examination of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So strap in and prepare yourselves for one hell of an interesting journey. We're on this roller coaster ride together, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this book with you. Before we begin, just a quick disclaimer from our legal department. This book club reading falls under the Fair Use Provisions, Section 107 of the United States Copyright Act. It is intended strictly for nonprofit educational purposes such as criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research purposes, as well as making this book accessible to persons with a reading disability, for the blind, and for people who are learning the English language. I encourage you to purchase a copy of this book from your favorite bookseller and follow along in the text with this recording as we go. During the reading, I will pause from time to time to provide analysis, critique, and commentary on the book, add my own insights as a journalist and historian, point out errors that the author or book editors didn't catch in the editing process, make some corrections on factual inaccuracies, and answer viewer questions. You're welcome to ask any questions you might have about the book in the comments section or the live chat, and I'll do my best to answer all of them in the next video. This book club is an interactive experience, so I want to hear your thoughts as well. And now, let's begin our journey. This is a 600-page book, so I'm obviously not going to read the whole thing. I've just selected some highlights that I'd like to share, and hopefully that will pique your curiosity. If you want to know the rest, you'll have to buy the book. So we'll start on page 1 with the prologue, An Unthinkable Tragedy. It was a gray, dreary, and unremarkable Saturday afternoon in Hyannisport. Out on a stretch of pebble-covered sand, facing a dark, restless ocean, stood an elderly woman wearing a black baseball cap. As she took in the endless vista, she bent down to pick up a seashell. She rolled it in the palm of her hand and then flung it into the sea. Appearing lost in thought, she pulled her white down jacket close in order to keep the chill of Nantucket Sound at bay. To see her walk just a few steps, it was clear that she had a slight limp. Meanwhile, a young lady in a starched white maid's uniform approached and stood directly behind her. After a few moments of hesitation, she tapped her on the shoulder. "Mrs. Kennedy," she said, "the priest will be here at 5 o'clock to say Mass. He's asked if you had any particular scripture in mind for the reading." Ethel Kennedy turned to face the woman. With eyes reddened and face drawn, she seemed even older than her 71 years. Her frame was slight, shoulders slim, and slightly hunched forward. "How well I remember my own wedding," Ethel said wistfully, not responding to the woman's question. "We Kennedys are known for our great weddings, as you know. Mine and Bobby's was so beautiful." According to the maid's later recollection, Ethel then spoke of the formal white satin gown she wore on that special day, so many years earlier, when she and Robert Kennedy were wed. She also spoke of the long diaphanous veil trimmed with delicate orange blossoms, and the elegant, dainty gloves. But we called them mitts in those days, she remembered. They were satin and had pearls on them. "People don't wear gloves so much anymore," she mused, as she reached into her pocket and pulled out large black sunglasses. She put them on. "I wonder why that is," she said, seeming distracted. "Gloves are so nice. Don't you agree?" Her maid nodded. Over the years, Kennedy weddings have been more than mere events. They've been the subject of national curiosity, all the way back to the family's patriarch, Joseph's, who wed Rose in 1914, through to Bobby and Ethel's in 1950, Eunice's to Sergeant Shriver in 1953, and Jack's to Jackie Bouvier, also in 1953. And there were so many more. Kennedy's sisters, Pat's, to actor Peter Lawford in 1954, and Jean's to Stephen Smith 2 years later. Then there was Ted's to Joan Bennett in 1958. The list goes on and on, especially as the next generation took their own spouses. Who could forget the elegant wedding of Jackie's daughter Caroline to Ed Schlossberg in 1986? Wedding guest Robert Rauschenberg once said it felt as if there had been 75,000 Kennedys present. It probably felt like that to those in attendance. But then Caroline's brother, John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., only son of the slain President Kennedy, broke the tradition of big family weddings with a more intimate affair when he married the lovely Carolyn Bessette in 1996. It was a surprise, not only to the media, but also to many of Kennedy's friends and even family members. How he was ever able to pull it off remained a mystery to everyone. But John wed Carolyn privately on Cumberland Island, Georgia, with just a few close friends and relatives present. Unfortunately, the wedding ceremony planned for this day, Saturday, July 17th, 1999, between Ethel's daughter Rory and her beau, Mark Bailey, now hung in the balance because John Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn Bessette, and her sister Lauren were missing. John and Carolyn had been on their way from Essex County Airport in Fairfield, New Jersey, to Hyannis Airport on Cape Cod in order to attend Rory's wedding at the Kennedy compound. Although the houses that comprised the compound were summer homes for the Kennedys, the Hyannisport residences seemed to symbolize their unity, serving as headquarters for observances, celebrations, for funerals and wakes, for auspicious announcements, commemorative rites, and family holidays like the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. First, though, John and Carolyn were scheduled to stop at Martha's Vineyard to drop off Lauren, a vice president at Morgan Stanley Dean Witter. However, something apparently happened to their plane. The small, single-engine red and white Piper Saratoga hadn't been seen on radar since 9:30 p.m., half an hour before it should have landed on Martha's Vineyard. There was nothing anyone could do except pray. "Will the Mass be served at my house or at Senator Kennedy's?" Ethel asked. She attended Mass almost every single day, either at her Catholic church or, quite often, in her own home, where a priest would come to perform it. Of course, she would also walk out if the sermon hit her the wrong way or if she didn't like the priest. But everyone knew that about Ethel. "Whichever you prefer," answered Ethel's maid. "I think maybe my house would be best," Ethel decided. "Yes, we'll have it on my porch. And will Father O'Byrne say Mass?" she asked. "Yes." Ethel shook her head sadly. "He married John and Carolyn just a few years ago," she recalled. "And now here we are today. Oh, my poor Johnny," she added, looking out at the gray sea and merging skyline. She hadn't used the pet name since John was a tot, at least not that anyone could remember. "Oh, dear Lord," she said, as if just hit with a revelation. "If Jackie was alive, I don't know how she would handle this. In fact, I don't think she could bear it, do you?" Ethel's maid didn't comment. "I love all my boys," Ethel continued. "You know, I love my girls too, but my boys, they have given me the most trouble. And for some reason, I just love my boys so much. And Johnny, I always thought of him as one of my own," she concluded, sadly. It had been just before midnight on Friday night, not long after the family and guests retired after the rehearsal dinner, that Senator Ted Kennedy learned of John's missing plane. He wasn't that concerned, at least not at first. After all, John was nothing if not unpredictable. Perhaps he had changed his plans, Ted reasoned, and just hadn't informed anyone. However, after a few calls, Ted began to fear the worst. He spent the rest of the night on the telephone, talking to the FAA and the Coast Guard, as well as any of John's friends he knew to find out if they had any information. Finally, at about 5 a.m., he had no choice but to telephone Ethel to tell her the gut-wrenching news that John's plane had gone missing. He and Ethel, whom he lovingly called Ethie, had been through so much over the years that this seemed like just one more awful moment that they would have to share. After speaking to Ted, Ethel tearfully gathered those family members present in the house to tell them what was going on. The rest of the day would be a waiting game. Even though it was obvious that the plane had gone down somewhere, no one in the family was willing to give up hope, least of all Ethel Kennedy. "I don't give up easily," she said, "at least not on something I believe in. I have no doubts," she said, "not a one." It would be just like her nephew, she said, to simply show up a day late and have the most wildly entertaining story to tell about his delay. The phone hadn't stopped ringing at Ethel's all morning. She would jump every time it rang, hoping it was good news. One of the calls was from Holly Safford, whose company was catering Rory's wedding. She had just heard on television that John was missing. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Kennedy," she said, according to her memory of the conversation. "This is just so devastating. I don't know what to say." "Holly, my dear, there is no need to be sorry because they're going to find him," Ethel said, her tone strong and reassuring. "We are going to have a wedding today, I guarantee it." "Is there anything I can do for you, Mrs. Kennedy?" "Yes," she answered. "Please tell your staff to stand by and wait for further instructions. The wedding is not canceled. They will find John. I know it." 3 long hours passed. Still no word. As Ethel made her way back to the home from the shoreline, 2 of her grandchildren, Kate and Carrie Kennedy, joined her. She held their hands As they passed a flagpole with an American flag flapping in the wind, the three stopped for a second and looked up at it. It was not at half-mast. Not yet, anyway. "Go, go, go," Ethel was then heard calling out to the children. "Run, run, run! It's a beautiful day. Go have fun." With that, the two children raced across the white sand beach and down to the shore. Ethel continued walking, still limping and showing signs of the hip replacement surgery she'd undergone earlier that year. Slowly, she made her way past billowing white tents that had just been erected for the wedding ceremony and subsequent party. The site was bustling with activity as people carried elaborate flower arrangements onto the property, roses for the most part, of every size, every variety, and it seemed most every color under the sun. Meanwhile, caterers with large trays of desserts unloaded their goods from a massive truck in Ethel's driveway. One caterer almost tripped as she tried to navigate over a tangle of power cords while carrying a towering tray of cookies. "Careful," Ethel said, laughing. "Don't hurt yourself." Also scurrying about the premises were reporters and photographers from People magazine who had somehow gotten into the Kennedy compound. "Inform them that Mrs. Kennedy said they are not allowed on these premises," Ethel was overheard telling one of the many uniformed policemen patrolling the property. "There should be no press here at all," she said, now seeming quite annoyed. In her hand was a white linen napkin, folded and tied at the top with a delicate gold ribbon. "This is our home," Ethel declared. "It is not a park." She then looked at the napkin in her hands and untied the ribbon around it. It had Rory's initials on it and Mark's. Then, who knows why she did it, whether it was because of some deeply buried sense of the inevitable, she crumpled the napkin and tossed it into a nearby trash can. Eventually, Ethel walked up the floral-lined pathway to her house. An empty hammock swung on the porch, and the home's windows were shuttered like all of the other white clapboard homes in the compound. Standing on her porch and looking out at the waves crashing on the beach in the distance, she tilted her head and allowed the ocean breeze to cool her face. She seemed to be trying to ignore the bedlam swirling around her when, out of the corner of her eye, she must have seen Ted Kennedy approaching from the direction of his own home in the compound. Family members, household staff, and those responsible for the wedding preparations looked on as Ethel extended her arms to the oft-troubled man she'd always considered more a brother than just a brother-in-law. He'd been in the hospital delivery room, holding her hand, in place of his deceased brother when she gave birth to Rory. How could she ever forget that? Unfortunately, Ted had bad news for Ethel. He'd just heard from the Coast Guard that a person standing on the shore near Gayhead, less than a mile from Jackie's vacation home, had spotted something black floating in the water. She'd thought it was a trash bag, but then one of her friends jumped into the surf to investigate and moments later returned with a suitcase. The two beachgoers gazed at the luggage for a long moment before finally lifting the identification flap. There they found a business card from Morgan Stanley. On it was the name Lauren Bissett, Vice President. It would get worse. A prescription bottle made out to Carolyn Bissett would emerge from the waves, a bag of kayaking gear, a piece of an airplane seat, a headrest, an aircraft wheel, all stomach-turning flotsam of a flight gone deadly wrong, now washing ashore and seeming to seal forever the fate of its passengers. Ted had said he didn't know how he would tell Ethel such terrible news, but he knew that it should come from him. While the senator relayed the news to her, Ethel Kennedy nodded solemnly, as if trying to take it in, as if trying to fathom the unfathomable. When he finished speaking, she seemed stunned as she just stood in place, staring at him in disbelief. She'd been so strong all day, as was usually her fashion in times of crisis. But this was just too much to take. This was more than she could bear. She began to cry, and as she did so, she seemed to become unsteady on her feet. So we reached out for her and held her close. For a long time, he held her close. And that's the prologue. And in the next video, we're going to get into part 1, which is all about Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. It's going to be quite a chapter, so I hope you'll tune in for the next video in this series. Until then, I'm Lori Spencer. Thanks for listening.